Bienvenidos, ushamdid, and welcome UMGC learners from the CMIT-455 Section 6380 course for the spring 2021 semester. This is the final packet tracer activity of the semester and of this course. So we're going to be focusing on Packet Tracer Activity 26.2.5, and this is a nice segue after having worked with the old model of user authentication and taking a look at how we can protect our console and Vty lines. And now we're going to step that up by taking a look at AAA, Authentication, Authorization, and Accounting on Cisco routers, and our focus in this video is going to be on authentication. So let's go ahead and jump in to the final activity and take a look at the topology that we're working with here. You can see we have a Tacac server over here on the left of the diagram, and then over here on the right we have a RADIUS server that we're also going to be working with. So we're going to configure some local user accounts. Again, we still want to have that local user account as a fail-safe. And then we're going to be doing some verification of local AAA authentication. We're going to configure server-based AAA. We're going to verify server-based AAA and do some server-based AAA using RADIUS as well as Tacac. So let's go ahead and dive into the activity and take a look up here. I really like how they, I really appreciate how they included this note up here. So iOS version 15.3 uses script as a secure hashing algorithm. However, the iOS version currently supported in Packet Tracer uses MD5, right? So that's a great thing to note. We've talked about the use of changing the hashing algorithm from MD5 to a type 9 or a type 8, which would be your SHA-256. However, here in Packet Tracer, right, MD5 always use the most secure option available on your equipment, but MD5 is what we're going to be using here. So as we scroll down a little bit further, let's go ahead and test some connectivity. So from PCA, and let's give ourselves a little bit more room here with which to work so we can see what's going on. Let's see if we can ping PCB. And PCB's IP is, let's mouse over PCB up here. Actually, I think we have to click in, and it's going to be 2.3. So we're going to go ahead and say ping 192.168.2.3 and see if we can ping PCB. Then we're going to try to ping PCC, which is 3.3. And I can bet that PCA is 1.3. So let's say 3.3. And again, we're checking to make sure we've got connectivity throughout the network, and then they want us to check from PCB over to PCC. We'll give ourselves some more room here. Let's pull this up and let's say ping 192.168.3.3, and we've got connectivity there. We might as well pull PCC up just in case we need it, and so we've got it handy. Now, we're going to configure a local username on router 1. So you might be asking, why would we go to router 1 and create a local username account? Aren't we trying to get away from that by using the Tacacs and the RADIUS server? Well, remember, what happens if something goes wrong with Tacacs or RADIUS and for whatever reason we're unable to authenticate? Well, we want to have a fallback account of some kind, and that's what this account is going to allow us to do. So router 1, and I missed that where it mentioned Cisco Con, and then sort of that regular setup of passwords. So Cisco CON-PA55, Cisco CON-PA55. I swear that's what I saw up here. Cisco Con-PA55. Oh, I'm sorry. Was reading it backwards. EN. So EN, because we're going to an enable mode. All right, so it's going to be Cisco EN-PA55, and now we're logged into privilege exec mode. So let's get into global config, and let's go ahead and say username, and it's going to be admin, capital A with the 1 at the end, admin1, with a secret password, again, that MD5 hash of admin1 PA55. All right, so you can see we even got a few points for that. So now we're going to configure local AAA authentication for console access. Now remember, when we're talking about the use of RADIUS versus TACACS Plus, there's a couple of things that we need to touch on. Remember, TACACS Plus is a Cisco developed protocol. So we can call it Cisco proprietary. It is supported by other vendors, Juniper being one of those vendors. And it's really used and shines for network device access control, right? And there's a serious difference between RADIUS and TACACS. TACACS is all about network device access control. RADIUS is about secure network access control, not network device control. Now, can RADIUS be used for network device access control? It can. But in a Cisco environment, it typically isn't because TACACS is so much more robust. So TACACS separates each of the A's, authentication, authorization, and accounting, into their own mutually exclusive elements. They're each separated, right? With RADIUS, it combines the majority, or I should say a large amount of the functions that relate to authentication and authorization. And those are combined together. That's not always a good thing. Now, where does RADIUS outshine TACACS? Well, RADIUS is far more detailed when it comes to accounting, right? And RADIUS is an open standard. TACACS is Cisco proprietary, but again, it's known and supported by many other vendors. Now, in terms of TACACS Plus, I said it's Cisco proprietary. It leverages TCP. RADIUS uses UDP, right? And then we talk about the encryption of the data. So TACACS encrypts the entire packet. RADIUS does not. RADIUS only encrypts the password. And so again, that's just sort of a handful of the differences between TACACS Plus and RADIUS, and why TACACS, again, in a Cisco environment, TACACS is what you're going to be using when you're trying to accomplish network device access control, right? Me accessing a switch, me accessing a router, right? Administrator A accessing a router. That's network device access control. Secure network access control is about getting getting the identity of some device, right? Is this iPhone allowed to connect to the network? Is this wireless client allowed to connect to the network? And so there's a difference there, right? And kind of think of it like this. You're profiling devices primarily with RADIUS, right? That's where it shines. And with TACACS Plus, you're really using it to sort of authenticate administrators that are trying to access your Cisco routers, switches, and devices. Okay. Now, remember, you can use TACACS. You could try to use TACACS for secure network access control and RADIUS for network device access control, but there's a difference there, right? And we really are focused in when we're accessing routers and switches and we're setting up AAA, we're talking about TACACS Plus. Okay, but I want to stress that you could use RADIUS if you so choose. All right, so we enabled, so now we're going to enable AAA on router 1, and we're going to configure AAA authentication for the console login to use the local user database. So let's go ahead and dive into router 1 here. And the first thing we're going to do is we're going to say AAA new model, right? So this is the new model of AAA. And so I was referring to creating a local user account and going onto the Vty lines and putting login local as well as transport input SSH, right? That login local command, that's your old model, right? So we say AAA new model. If I don't say AAA new model, right, this is disabled by default. In fact, let's take a look here real briefly at a Cisco 3945E, and it's running the most recent release of code, this 15.7.3 M7, and you can see if I was to try to say AAA authentication, you'll notice it doesn't recognize the command, right? I have to say, and you'll notice what happens here as well. You have to enable new access control commands and functions. And again, this disables old commands, right? So the old model. So we're interested in the new model, which, as you can see, even today is disabled by default on Cisco iOS devices. So I would say AAA new model, right? So now as soon as I do that, and let's kind of follow along over here. So we'll say AAA new model. And now when I say AAA and I do a question mark, you can see that we have many more options, right? So if I said AAA here in Packet Tracer, you can see that Packet Tracer is going to make sure that it limits to what we need to know, right? And so we've got, there's our 3 A's: authorization, authentication, and accounting, right? So we want to, where are we at here? We're on number 4, and configure AAA authentication for the console login to use the default method list. So let me go ahead right now and let's say do show run, right? So you can see there's the AAA new model, and you'll notice that we've got the local user account, but there's no other AAA information configured on router 1. So we're going to say AAA authentication. And now we get to what is it that we're trying to authenticate here? Is it going to be lists for enable, right? To use that enable password, or is it going to be to get logged in? And you can also use AAA for your PPP, right? The point-to-point protocol. So we're interested in the login. Now, this is when we get to the method list portion of the command. And we're going to be creating what's, again, referred to as a method list. It's basically a list of methods that we're going to try to use to authenticate ourselves. Before we do that, we can name this, right? Like I could say, you know, con_line. And all the word, right, this named authentication list, all that is I'm just giving it a name that I'm going to be referring to at some later point, right? And I would go on to the console line, or I'm sorry, the Vty lines or the console line, and I would put, you know, authentication using con_line if that's what I wanted to do. So here, we're just simply going to go ahead and say default. And now we get to the method list. So I can say a group, and then I could reference the name of a Tacac server group. And you'll see, I'll show you how to create, and they show it here, but I'll show you there's a new syntax that's going to be used that you're probably going to end up using on your Cisco devices. So I could refer to a group of Tacac servers. I could refer to a group of RADIUS servers. Then I could say, use local username authentication. And then I could even say use local authentication, but make it case sensitive for the username, right? Then that implies that when you say local, that it is not case sensitive. And then I could follow that up at the very end by saying none. So if I can't authenticate with the Tacac servers and I can't authenticate with the RADIUS servers, then maybe I'm going to try locally authenticating, which is what we're kind of after here. But again, I want to explain what you're seeing here. And the enable is for the enable password authentication, but we're not interested in the enable option right now. So we're really focused on group, local case, and none. And we know that we want this to log in using the default method list on the console line. And hold on one second. Use AAA. Did I miss something here? Enable AAA on router 1 and configure AAA authentication for the console login to use the local database. All right. And so then we're simply going to say local, right? And that doesn't say default. I thought I saw default up here. I just want to make sure. Step 4 for authentication, I'm reading this here for the console login. So it's interesting. So step 3 says on router 1, configure AAA authentication for the console login to use the local database. And then it says enable AAA on router 1 and configure AAA authentication for the console login to use the default method list. Okay, so we're going to have it use the default method list and the local account. And let's see if, and again, if I do a question mark here, you could see, I could say, okay, first check the local database. Then I could say, you know, group, if we have some Tacac servers, then I would list Tacacs if that's the name of the Tacac server group that we've created. Here in this activity, it doesn't look like they're going to do a group. It looks like we're going to do just simply a Tacac server host. With a key, but if there was a group of servers, in other words, more than one, you can group them together and then it'll use that group. And then I could say, if I can't get there, then, you know, we'll just say none, right? We'll do no authentication, sort of as a catch-all. All right, so we're just going to leave it here as authentication local, login default local. And let me go back here real quickly and check something. I just want to make sure. Yeah, login default local. Again, I'm just checking to make sure we're not, it kind of confuses why step 3 and 4 are almost identical. So let's go ahead and hit enter. And again, that's what they were looking for, right? We bumped up 4 percentage points there. So we should be good with 3 and 4. And then step 5 is verify the AAA authentication method. So verify the user exec login using the local database. Okay, so let's go ahead and we want to verify that this is going to work. And that means that we're going to have to go into line con 0. If I do a question mark here, you can see that we've got access class and accounting and data bits and things like that. But what we want to apply, right, in order to get this on the console line is it's going to be under login. And you see here I say login authentication, and we can say if it was a specialized named list, we could do that. Or I could just simply say login authentication default. So now let's go ahead and type in. Let's do a write mem, and we're going to go ahead and exit all the way out. So now when I hit enter, you can see it's asking me for the username, right? Because the login, it's not login local anymore. And I'll show you that that option should be gone because we've enabled the AAA new model of authentication and authorization and accounting. So I say admin1 and the password, which I've already forgotten, is going to be, what is it? Cisco Con PA55. Hold on one second. Admin1, sorry. All right, so we'll say admin1 and then admin1 PA55 and take a look at that. So that is authenticating, right? And that is validating. And where are we at here before I go too far? Sorry about that. Step number 5, we just verified user exec mode, right? So clearly this is working, right? The authentication that we configured is working. So now let's get into global config, and here we go, Cisco ENPA55. And let's get into global config, and let's say line con 0. And now let me say login question mark. Now it still shows local, but I think that if you were to enable AAA on a real Cisco router, I'm not sure if it removes that. So let's just real briefly come over here and see what happens. So let me say AAA authentication login default local, right? Now there's no username on here, and that's okay. So if I go to line con 0, because I can always reload this, and I say login authentication and default, to just use the default setup, right? It doesn't have a custom name, it's just the default name, right? And now if I was to say login question mark, is local there? Yeah, so as advertised on real Cisco iOS, and that's what I thought we were gonna see, you do not see local, right? So this goes to the point that I explained earlier. When you enable the new model of authentication and you apply it, with AAA new model, login local you won't see when we do this login authentication default, right, or the AAA new model. It's going to go away, right? Although we do see it here, not a big deal, but just sort of a sidebar there. All right, so that takes care of step 5, and we have validated step 5. So now we're going to configure local AAA authentication for the Vty lines. And my guess is we might want to be doing a custom name here. We'll see what happens. So if we're going to protect the Vty lines, that means we're going to have SSH access coming in here, which means we need to have IP domain name. And you can clearly see that this also was a security.com. We're going to do the domain name because we know when we go to say crypto key generate RSA, that if there's no domain name, we're going to be in trouble. So we'll do 1024 bits as they indicated, and now we're up to 15% complete in this activity. But again, this was an old CCNA security activity, but it's still a good one. And yes, we're finally going to be creating a named list. We're not using the default method list name anymore, which is default. We're going to be creating a custom one. So let's do that. We'll say AAA authentication. If I do a question mark, you can see, is it for the enable password? Is it for PPP? No, it's for simply logging in. And now we're going to call this SSH-login. And typically in my career, and mileage may vary, but we've always used custom named AAA authentication login method list names. We typically do not leave it with the default, right? So we'll go ahead and say SSH-login, and this is going to authenticate our logins using local AAA, right? And so here we go. If I had Tacac servers, I would say group. If we just want local, I can do local. If I wanted it to be case sensitive, we could make it case sensitive. So we're going to say local, and my guess is that is what they are looking for. All right, so configure the Vty lines to use that defined AAA authentication method. So before we do that, let's say show run and pipe it to include AAA. And so now we can see there is our AAA default method list that we're using for the console line, and then the SSH login method list. And the method list is literally one method, local. That is the method. And so from here, we're going to go line Vty, and I'm assuming, let's quickly take a look here, do show run section line Vty. I think there's going to be 4. Yep. So you can see right now there's a password on the Vty lines, but that we're going to be changing that. So line Vty 0 to 4, and it's going to be login authentication. And so here's where you say SSH-login. Now, my question to you is, it's cool that we created this SSH-login to use the local database to log in. Could we have just used default? Yeah, absolutely, we could have. Because it's the authentication method, the method list is no different. So it's not that it's checking a RADIUS server or a Tacac server, or that it's looking to be case sensitive, right? It's just still using the same local method. So they're doing this so that you can see, oh, so I can have the default and I can use that, and I can have custom ones and I can use that and use those. And so we just did. So login authentication, SSH login, and that's interesting. They gave you 19 percentage points for that. So that takes care of that. And now let's verify. So let's come over to PCA, and now let's SSH over to router 1. And so again, remember it's SSH minus L as in Larry. And then we're going to put that username admin1, and we're going to 192.168.1, and I'm going to guess it's going to be .1, and I think it is. All right, so now it wants that password. So we're going to say admin1 PA55, and take a look at that. Works beautifully. Right? Works absolutely beautifully. In fact, let me see if we have access to, and I would be shocked if we did. Oh, AAA, debug AAA authentication, we do. So let's do this. I'm going to turn AAA authentication debugging on, and let's see if we can get a richer set of data, to look at here. So I've logged out, right? And let's see, did we get any debugs? No, nothing. All right, let's see what happens here when I go to log in and we say admin 1 PA55. We're on router 1. The debugs are running, and take a look at that, right? So again, not much, but at least we know AAA authentication login, pick method list, and look at the method list it's looking at, SSH-login. So debug AAA authentication, this is what we end up seeing, right? And then again, just a little deeper dive and some additional commands that you can keep in your toolbox when you're working with AAA. If you were trying, if you had anything you wanted to troubleshoot, right? So we've got our verification there. So now we're on part 3 of this activity. So now it's going to be configuring server-based AAA. So this was router-based. This was locally configured here. So now we're going to set it up to where we have a group. And I'm just kind of looking ahead here, and I'm really liking what we're going to be doing in this activity because it's going to give us a look at 3 different ways to do things. So configure a backup local database entry called admin. And again, so we're on router 2. So for backup purposes, configure a local username admin2 with the secret password of admin2pa55. Well, let's get router 2 up here, and let's go to work on router 2. All right, so we're on router 2, Cisco ENPA55. We'll get into global config. We're going to say username admin2 secret, and it's going to be admin2pa55. So admin2 pass. And they even threw us a few points for that. So verify the Tacac server configuration. So ping the Tacac server to verify that it's reachable from router 2. And then click on the Tacac server, and on the Services tab, click AAA. Notice that there is a network config entry for router 2 and a user setup entry for admin 2. So here's the difference, right? So on router 1, we did a local AAA new model configuration. So we're no longer using the old model where we simply say login local on a console line or on the Vty lines. We're using AAA because it's going to give us enhanced control. Now, when it's not server-based AAA, it's not really that much enhanced, right? So now we've got a Tacac server that we're going to be accessing. And the first thing I want to see is what is the IP of this guy? It's 2.2. But we've got this Services tab, and here is AAA. So again, on your Tacac server, which back in the day, and I'm sure some people are still using it, could be Cisco ACS. However, now, and as of Identity Services Engine 2.0, ICE, I-S-E, Identity Services Engine, supports Tacac Plus. And so ACS is going away, right? It's kind of, it should probably be out of your environment at this point. And you can see here, there's our username and password configuration, right? And here's the device that we have a key, right? A secret key that we're going to be configuring so that the device communicates with the Tacac server. We're going to tell the router 2, that when someone tries to log into you, and we can do it, if it's console line, if it's the Vty lines, but here's what's going to happen. Before you allow that authentication, you're going to send a request out to the Tacac server and say, hey, first of all, am I even authorized to be sending you requests, right? Are you going to service this request for me? And then second, hey, admin 2 is trying to log in with this password. Is that cool, right? So then we've got the information on the Tacac server, right? It's going to be on the Tacac server to perform that authentication. And then we could do authorization. Are they authorized to run certain commands? And then we can do accounting, right? And a common thing you'll see with accounting is start, stop, right? So we start when the session starts, and then we end when the session ends. We end the accounting of the commands that were being run. All right, so let's go ahead. It's 2.2, so we'll close that down. And let's jump back up here. So again, for backup purposes, just in case, we're going to do that. So we verified that. And let's configure Tacac plus server specifics on router 2. So we pull router 2 up here, and you can see that they actually give us the the commands, and I'm so glad they dropped this in here. This is a huge bonus right here. That note right there is very important. This causes a lot of confusion because for the longest time, a lot of the labs, and as you can see, they still are, using this deprecated legacy syntax to create the Tacac server entry and then to put in the Tacac server key. And I'm going to show you sort of the newfangled way to do this when you're using Tacac, where you basically create a Tacac server and then you give it a name, right? You say Tacac server name, and then we're going to do an address, and then we put the key string in. Whereas here, it's a little bit different. And I'm going to run these on my real Cisco router so that you can see that one of them should tell you that it's no longer supported or that they are deprecated. But let's go ahead. Let's drop in the legacy syntax here. So we're going to say Tacac server host. And if I was to do a question mark, you can see we can do the key or the host. I'll say host. And if I do a question mark, it has to be the IP in packet tracer, right? In packet tracer, it wants that IP address. It won't let me put a name like, Tacac _server _1. Can't do that. All right, so we're going to go ahead and say 192.168.2.2. And you could put the key, right? But they have it so that we're doing it. And I'm going to do it like this for scoring purposes so that it doesn't cause the scoring engine any heartache. So we're going to say Tacacs, Tacacs, PA55, right? And make sure we get the points for that. So we're 50% of the way through the activity. Now, let's take a step out to real Cisco routers. And the first router I'm going to jump on here, and this is running 15.1 code, right? So this is a little older, and that's okay. Oh, ABC 123, I'm hoping. Okay, good. Whew. All right. So here we are on router 8. If I say AAA, and actually I don't even have to say AAA new model, we can go ahead and say Tacac server, and you can see there's a lot of other things we can pick, but you can see there's that host option. So when I do a question mark, take a look. You can do the host name or the IP address of the Tacac server, right? So I could put the host name in there or the IP. And so let's go ahead and back that up. So you could also do the new, if I do Tacac question, sorry, and it doesn't look like, so 15.1, it doesn't look like it was supported. Or I'm sorry. Yeah, it doesn't look like it was supported here with 15.1, but that's okay. We've got a 15.7, right? And this guy is super brand new, and now we might be in trouble. Did I use admin 1 PA55? And I may have locked myself out of this router. Yeah, so it's okay. We're locked out of the router, so we'll have to survive with router 8 and router 9. So again, you would say Tacac server, and I could put the host name in there, right, if it had a host name, or I could just simply say host 192.168.2.2, right? And that's what I was looking for. That CLI, that syntax right there will be deprecated soon. And again, this is 15.1 code, so I was hoping that I had not locked myself out over here. And again, let me roll back and see what I did so that because I'd really like to get in here. Oh, you know what I did? So as soon as you say AAA new model, I don't think I created a backup account. So in other words, what just happened is I've locked myself out of the router. So now you know why you want to create that backup account. All right, so here's what I'm going to do. I can power these routers off remotely from right where I'm sitting. So I'm just going to turn them off, and then I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to turn them back on. And we never save the config, so when router 2 comes back up, we'll be able to jump back in there. All right, so back out to the packet tracer activity. So I've got the key, I've got the Tacac server indicated there. So now we're on step 4. We're going to enable AAA on router 2 and configure all logins to authenticate using the AAA Tacac server. If it is not available, then use the local database. And this is a very key distinction. It says if it is not available, that means if it can't reach it. It doesn't mean that it can get to the Tacac server and the Tacac server says the request is denied. So what's not happening is, and let's get the syntax typed in here on the CLI. So what's happening is, if it goes to the Tacac server and it's denied, that's it, it's denied. It doesn't go to the next method in the list. Only if it's unreachable does it then go to the next method in the list. So don't think it tries to authenticate with the Tacac server, and then if it gets denied, it says, oh, well, then let me try local. No. If it's denied right there, and that's the end of the authentication process, right? And that, again, there's a distinction there between it gets denied and it's over with, or I can't get to the Tacac server, and then I just move on after a short period to the next method in the method list. So we've got our Tacac server in here. So we're going to go ahead and say, actually, we didn't even do AAA new model yet. So we'll say AAA new model, AAA authentication, and this is going to be for our logins, right? And are we creating configure AAA authentication for the console login to use the default AAA authentication method? So hold on here. So enable AAA on router 2 and configure all logins to authenticate using the Tacac server. So it doesn't give us the name. So I'm going to do this because I don't think, you see how what it's asking here in the next step, it says configure authentication for the console lines to log in to use the default AAA authentication method. And this says all logins, so it's got to be default. It's got, I think the reading of this here is that step 4 doesn't tell you to name it. So you're going to make it the default, and then you're just going to apply that login authentication default to the console line, even though, you know, we're setting it up right here. Okay, so we say default, right? That's going to be the name of our method list. And here is where you could do a server group, right? Or say local or none. So I'll say group, and you can use a list of Tacac plus servers, right? And again, we've created that group of Tacac servers. And then it says you could put group to use, where's it at right here? You could use group to use that server group, or we could just leave it with Tacac plus. But remember, it says if it's not available, then use local. So remember, it's going to try to use Tacac plus. If it can't reach the Tacac plus server, not that it reaches it and it gets denied, but if it can't reach the Tacac plus server, then it's going to refer to the local database. And so again, this is kind of like our catch-all, right? Our safety net. That's why we created the local account on router 2, the local username account on router 2, is so that if for whatever reason the Tacac server's having issues or switch 2 blows up, right, we can still get in here using that local setup, right? So AAA authentication, login, default, group, Tacac plus, local, and it wants us to put that on the console line. Oops, sorry, not lint, line con 0. And let's say login, authentication, default. And we should pick a few points up for that. And we do. So we did step 4, we did step 5. Now we're down to verifying user exec login using the AAA Tacac server. So what we could do here is let's save our config. And we'll say write mem. And let's go ahead and say debug AAA authentication. And let's see what ends up happening here, because we should see a little bit more because there's going to be an exchange of information with the Tacac plus server. And we are going to verify this by simply logging out and trying to get logged back in. So username, and here I'm going to say admin2. We're going to use a lowercase a because I did not say local-case. And the password is, what do we say? admin2pa55. Pick a method list default login invalid. Let's see if Packet Tracers wants that capital A, even though we didn't use local case. Or I've got, what's the path? Let me double check. Admin PA2. That's what I did. Admin PA2. Oh, sorry. Not PA2. admin to PA55. And take a look at that. Again, we didn't get much more out of that debug. However, we did see that it picked that authentication method list. That's the one that it's using. And we are now on router 2, right? So the authentication is working. So now we're going to be using server-based AAA authentication using RADIUS on router 3, right? So we're going to be using group RADIUS. And let's take a quick look here, see if I bailed myself out on router 2. It looks like I might have. Do not prompt me. Okay, good. So that's one of the good things about not saving your configuration. So what I wanted to talk about was that syntax, right, that we saw on router 8, where it came up here and said, this CLI will be deprecated soon. Use new server CLI, where we're going to say Tacac space server instead of Tacac -server. And again, remember when I said Tacac on here, if I say TACAS and do a question mark, it doesn't recognize any other commands, right? Because it doesn't support that new server command yet. So let's go over here to here to 15.7 code, and let's say Tacac, and I'll do a question mark. It says unrecognized command, but let's turn on AAA new model. And that's probably what I needed to do over there on, yeah, probably what I needed to do over here on router 8 is to get in that AAA new model, because I was under the assumption that that had been saved, but no, that had not. So we say Tacac, and there it is, right? So that's the new server configuration. But I want to come to router 2, which is running 15.7 code, to show you, if I say Tacac-server and do a question mark, you can see that the host option that we used earlier, it's not even here. So it's not even going to tell me it's deprecated. I can't even, it's gone, right? It is now gone. So there is no more Tacac-server. The way you do it is you define the servers by saying Tacac server, and then I can put the server name. So let me just say tac_srvr_01 for Tacac server 1. And now I go into this little sub-configuration mode. And so here's where I can say that the IPv4 address is 192.168.2.2, right? And here's where I could say that the key is, ABC123. And then I could come back and say Tacac server and then tac_srvr_02, because we'll probably have redundancy, right? So we've got 2 Tacac servers, and the IPv4 address of the Tacac server, that's the second one, is 168.2.3. And its key is XYZ123, right? So now let's say in. Let's come out here and say show run. Whoops, and we'll say show run section Tacac. And there we go, right? So it really cleaned up the config, because we've got these nice little configuration stanzas that have defined our Tacac servers, right? So there's Tac server 1, here's Tacac server 2, and it's super clear, right? As to, we've got 2 Tacac servers. And so what we could do is, if I get back into global config, I can say Tacac, and again, if you take a look at the, Tacac server, and I didn't want a Tacac server, sorry about that. We wanted, give me a second, AAA, it's AAA group actually is what it is, isn't it? Yeah, server group definition, yeah, there we go. So AAA group server Tacac plus, I just had to think for a second there. And here's where I say, tac_srvr_group. So let's say we bring a third Tacac server on board. I just go ahead, define it, and then add it to this group. And now we've got 3 Tacac servers. But again, it allows me to centralize the Tacac server definitions and group them together so that they can be used. And take a look here. It just simply has me now go ahead and add in the server, and I can use the name of the server, right? So tac_srvr_01. Oops, sorry, I forgot to put name. Right, and then I can come up and say server 2. And if we added a server, a server 3. And if we added a server 4, right? You can, and this is pretty cool, right? Telling you, hey, that's not defined. But again, you get the idea. So we define each server individually with its IP and its key. Then we group those servers together so that we've got some redundancy. And it's this group that I just created, Tacac server group, right, that we can then just lump all of those Tacac servers into. So let's go ahead and say in, let's do a show run and pipe it to section Tacacs. And there we go. Here's my AAA group for my Tacac servers. It's called TAC server group. And then this is what I would refer to say, oh yeah, so Tacac server 1, 2, 3, 4. And here are my definitions. There's Tacac server 1 and 2. And as you can see on 15.7 code, that legacy config command, which is tacacs-server host and the IP, and then tacacs-server key and the key, that's gone. It's not even supported with 15.7, right? All right. So now let's come back. That was a good segue out of part 3 into part 4, where we're going to be using RADIUS. So for backup purposes, right, what I didn't do on router 2 that caused me to have to turn it off and turn it back on was to create a local admin account. And so let's get that done. And Cisco ENPA55. So we'll get into global config and we'll say username admin3. And I'm assuming it's going to be a secret password of admin3PA55. So verify the RADIUS server configuration. Well, let's take a look at the RADIUS server and let's click on the AAA tab, and there's router 3. You can see server type is RADIUS. That's what we chose. And here is the admin3 username and password. Now, this is defined on the RADIUS server because remember, as soon as we tell the router that you are using AAA new model and we create the method list, and the first thing in the method list, just like we did on router 2 over here, remember, the first thing in the method list was group Tacacs plus. On router 3, it's going to be group RADIUS. And then we check the local database if we can't reach the Tacacs or the RADIUS server. If the Tacacs or the RADIUS server denies the request because we can reach it, then that's it. It is not going to check your local user database. Remember that. That causes a lot of confusion with learners that are under the impression that, oh, well, if it doesn't work with the Tacac server, then it just automatically goes to the local database. No, it's if it can't reach the Tacac server that it would go to the local database, or if it can't reach the RADIUS server, that it goes to the local database. Okay, notice that there's already a configuration entry for router 3. So router 3 is authorized to contact the RADIUS server. And this is another major difference between Tacacs and RADIUS. Tacacs Plus doesn't support EAP 802.1x. RADIUS does. And so again, there's another differentiation as to why when we refer to Tacacs as a network device access control, and RADIUS is a secure network access control, not a device access control, but a secure network access control. Because again, you could profile devices. You can use EAP 802.1x, right? So RADIUS advantage in that use case, right? But in terms of user accounts and accounting and authentication and authorization for devices, Tacacs Plus is your solution. All right, so now on router 3, let's get the specifics configured here. So it says configure the AAA RADIUS server IP address and secret key on router 3. Configure the server name as rad-server. Okay, Packet Tracer does not correctly score the configuration using the RADIUS server command. So this should be interesting. All right, so let's go Cisco ENPA55. We'll get into global config here. And let's go ahead and say, I think I already said AAA new model, but I'm sorry, I'm on router 2. I apologize. Let me make sure we're on the right router here before we blow this whole lab up. So we're going to say AAA new model, and we get that done. And so remember when we were doing the Tacac server command, right? It was Tacacs Tacacs-server. This is not a Tacac server. This is a RADIUS server. And let's see what happens here. So name for the RADIUS server config, rad-server. And we're at 69 points, and we got Zippo points, right? So we didn't get any points for that. We'll see if maybe we get some here. And so the IP address and secret key. So we'll come up here, and the IP address of this guy is 3.2. So let's go ahead and say address IPv4. And you can see that the packet tracer for the RADIUS anyway was sort of doing the new style configuration, but not for Tacac. So 192.168.3.2, and I don't think we're going to see any points for that. And so I'm wondering if we'll use the default. Let me see here on the services tab. Yeah, okay, so the RADIUS port 1645, that is the default. And remember that with RADIUS, there are a couple of port values that you can use. 1645 is for authentication and authorization. 1646 is your accounting. Remember, RADIUS kind of lumps together authentication and authorization, whereas Tacac splits out all three services. And that's the Cisco implementation. So so you may see on Juniper Gear or HP or Huawei or whatever the case may be, you might see the industry standard range used, which is there's another set of values, 1812 and 1813. 1812 for authentication and authorization, 1813 for accounting. And so we're going to go ahead and keep the default, and let's see, again, we don't get any points for that. And that's okay. The key value here, and let me see, what is the key? Oh, sorry, RADIUS. I was trying to see it down in here. RADIUS PA55. So key RADIUS PA55. Again, we're at 69%. Not sure we're going to see any points for these things because it was indicating that Packet Tracer does not correctly score the configuration when we're using the RADIUS server command. All right, so enable AAA on router 3 and configure all logins to authenticate using AAA RADIUS server. If it's not available, use the local database. Well, this is kind of old hat now, right? Because we're going to go ahead and say AAA authentication for all logins is going to use the default method list that's defined, which is this one with the name default. And we're going to use what? We're going to use the RADIUS group of servers. Now, if the RADIUS group is not available, we're going to use local authentication. I'm just reading over here to make sure we've got everything. So AAA authentication login, default group RADIUS, and then local, and that bumps us to 73%. And then configure AAA authentication for the console login. So that's, again, we've done this a few times now. So line con 0 login is going to be authentication, and we're using default, right? And that bumps me to 76%. So now let's verify. And so it says check results. Your completion percentage should be 100, but it's set up here that it doesn't correctly score that part of it. So let's go ahead and hit end. Let's save our config with the right mem. Let's exit out. Let's come back in. Admin 3 PA55. And did I get that password right? Admin. Oh, tell me. Okay, whew. All right, it looks like it might have timed out. That took a while. So hold on one second here. Let's go ahead and say Cisco EN PA55. And let's do a show run here. Okay, AAA new model, AAA authentication login, default group RADIUS, and that's what it wanted. Configure AAA authentication, console login, use the default AAA authentication method, which we did. And let's check and make sure, because that took much longer than I had anticipated it would. And there's the RADIUS server config. Is that 3.2? Is that right? Let's check that again. Did I put the wrong IP in? 192.168.3. .2 auth port 1645 radius PA 55. And that's got to be it. The secret is RADIUS PA55. Router 3. That has got to be correct. So now I'm kind of wondering if we're missing points and why that took so long. So here's what, let's do this. Let's do the debug. Debug AAA authentication. Oops. Debug AAA authentication. And then let's go ahead and say, let's log out. And so we should be able to see now when we come to log back in with admin 3 and admin 3 PA55. Okay. Yeah, it picked the right method list, right? But it doesn't show us if it went to the Radius server or not. And I'm wondering, again, I'm just curious, and that was a lot faster. So who knows? Maybe it was, we had to wait a second, but it is working. But you can see that we've validated everything. We've configured everything. Everything is working, but we're at 76%. So let's take a look at check results. And let's see what it doesn't like. Ah, okay. So it looks like it wanted the transport input set. So look at that, Vty line 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. So transport input SSH and then an IP domain name that we configured. I swear we configured the IP domain name. So let's go back and we'll take care of that on router 1. So what it was looking for, and we'll say admin 1 PA55, and we're in, and then Cisco ENPA55. And so let's get into global config, line VTY 024, and transport input SSH. Now the reason I didn't put this is because by default it's transport input all. And maybe I missed the instruction to do that, but I'm pretty sure I had that in here. So, and you can see that takes us to what, 96, meaning the last thing we're looking for is, I swear, include domain. Did I misspell something? IP domain name, which would have been right here. Use CCNA security.com is the domain name. CCNASECURITY.com. That is really bizarre. All right, well, let me do this. So this might be one of these secret bugs here. Undocumented feature. No IP domain name, CCNA security.com. And let's say IP, oops, domain name, CCNA.com. All right, so it doesn't like that. So again, I'm just going to try a couple different values here to see. IP domain dash name CCNA SECURITY.com. Boy, it does not like that. And what am I doing wrong here? I don't see a typo. So I'm wondering, IP domain dash name. Let's try CCNA dash security.com. No, it doesn't like that either. So it's got to be domain dash name CCNASECURITY.com. Okay, we're going to do this. Let's save our config and let's reload the router. And let's see if it, when it comes back up, and again, this happens sometimes, where you've got the right configuration command in there, but it doesn't give you the points. And so I'm reloading to see if it comes back up at 100. And so that's even worse. I think we were at 98. Now we're at 96. So admin 1 PA 55. And you saw I didn't use, it wasn't case, it was not case sensitive, right? Because I didn't say local case. so I could use a lowercase a. So there's definitely something with the domain name that it doesn't like on router 1, even though we have, oops, sorry, get that out of here. Even though we have the right domain name configured, as far as I can tell, again, unless I'm like completely missing it here, Cisco ENPA55, show run, include CCNA, and there it is, IP domain name, ccnasecurity.com. And that has got to be, I guess let me try, I'll try a couple more things and then we'll just call it a wrap here. So no IP domain name, ccnasecurity.com, IP domain dash name. What about ccnp.com? No, it doesn't like that. IP domain dash name, security.com. No, it doesn't like that either. So I think what would have to happen here is I'd have to open this packet, you know, go in as the admin on the packet tracer activity to see if I could see what the value is. Again, IP domain dash name. I mean, that is the command, ccna.com. I mean, that is the correct value. So I'm not sure. And that's where we're missing the 4 points. So I'm going to pause this real quick, and I am going to try a few things to see if I can't get the right value for you guys. But stand by just 1 second. All right, so that is definitely the right value. So this activity used to be in the CCNA security course, and I just went and checked the video I did for that about 3 or 4 years ago, which was Packet Tracer 3.6.1.2 from Module 3 in the CCNA security course. That is the correct value. So here's what I'm curious about. So I'm going to reset the activity, right? And this is going to override everything. I want to see if we get any points at all for entering in that domain name on router 1. So let's see if it gives us 4 percentage points here, because maybe it was an order of operations thing, Cisco ENPA55, and I'm in global config now, and I'm going to say IP domain dash name CCNA security.com. So we're at 0%, and that's what it is. Because that is definitely the command, unless the value is incorrect. I don't think it's grading that piece of it. So 96% is going to be the best that you can do on this. Again, if you know what that value should be, if you put, you know, if you figured out if there's a million values you punch in there or whatever, brute force it. But you're good. If you've got a 96%, you are good to go. All right. Well, this is kind of, you know, sad in a way. This is the last of the Packet Tracer tutorials and solution set videos for CMIT-455 section 6380, the CCNP ENCOR8 course curriculum. And that's a wrap, guys. So I hope you've enjoyed this semester. I hope these tutorials have added value to your studies. And that's really why they're put together, right? It's about so much more than it being an answer key. It's about adding value to the activities to go a little beyond the activities to make them more CCNP-like. All right, well, thank you guys for watching. Best of luck to you in your studies. And as I always say, I hope to see you in the next video.